video is going to be a conceptual one mainly. What I'd like to talk about is probably the most important thing, in my opinion, to learn on the guitar, and that is the scale pattern that you see before you. Now you can consider it one scale pattern or the 5 patterns that I've broken it into here, often referred to as a 5-pattern system or the caged system, because if you notice here, this is a C pattern, an A pattern, G, E, and D. It spells the word caged, so people call it the cage system. But this pattern right here, in my opinion, is the most important thing to learn on the guitar. If you want to spend your time learning anything on the guitar, it should be this. And I'm going to explain why that is over the course of this video, because once you learn this one pattern, or 5 if you want to think of it that way, you're really unlocking so much information. So let me first start off by just pointing out what this is here. These are the strings. Okay, here's your low E string, A, and down to your high E, up to the 12th fret. So once you get to this point of the pattern, it repeats again. Okay, that's a property of the guitar. Once you get beyond the 12th fret, it repeats what's on these frets. So really, all you have to learn is between the open strings and the 12th fret, the pattern. And there's systems to learn. This is one of them. You're looking at what's called the 5-pattern system. It breaks it into 5 different patterns so that you can digest these. I'll explain a little more. So to me, this is one big pattern, but you use systems like the 5-pattern or 7-pattern system, which are methods to learn the pattern. Okay, so it seems complicated to learn all this at first. I understand that. Many people quit before they even get started learning it. So one of the main points of this video is to let you know what learning the pattern will give you on the guitar, to kind of get you amped up to want to learn this pattern, because it unlocks basically everything for you if you just have certain pieces of knowledge after you memorize these patterns. So first, let me start by saying that learning the pattern is not as daunting as it may seem. The reason is that many of the subsections of this pattern repeat in multiple places. So if you take a notice here, like say this is the G note here in this 3rd fret, this open note. So this is set up for like the root of G. If you notice, there are dots right in back of it, a whole step ahead, and you can see the little pattern right around it, okay? If you come here to this G, it's the same pattern. So if you've learned the pattern here, like say these top 3 strings, it's exactly the same right here in these 3 strings. So you can just kind of copy paste in your brain and say, oh yeah, that's that. I can put that right there on this other G. And so for that reason, these patterns start to emerge, patterns within patterns, that make learning this thing not as complicated as what this chart looks like. This looks like a really complicated chart, but it's not that complicated once you get into it. So these similarities will emerge over time as you learn. You're just going to have to take my word for it that it's not as complicated as it looks. But my advice for anyone who hasn't gone down this road yet is to just start learning it immediately. Just learn it. Don't think about how hard it is. Just start learning it, because learning this pattern unlocks so much for you. And I'm going to talk about that. It's really amazing how learning this one pattern is the greatest investment of your time and is going to multiply your knowledge immediately. So just start by learning. Start memorizing the patterns. I would encourage using the 5-position system shown here. And this is called the cage system. I think I talked about that, why it's called caged, because these patterns have names. Like the C pattern here has the C chord in it, and that's why it's called the C pattern. So if you're familiar with the open C chord, it's right there. That's why this is called the C pattern. This one's called the E pattern because it has the E chord right there. This is the G pattern because it has the G chord in it. An open G chord is right there. But with these patterns, I encourage you not to learn them in the open position. Learn them like in the field of the fretboard. Anyway, that's why they're called what they are, because you got the C chord right there, the G chord, and on and on. And people put this acronym together and they call it the caged system. So I would start with this E pattern right here. And it's probably because it's one of the simpler patterns and the root is on the top string. There's 3 roots here, but you're going to have roots on your outside E strings. So it makes it advantageous for that reason. And it's associated with the major bar chord with the root on the 6th string. So just memorize the overall pattern and where the roots are, which are the open circles. Just sit down and notice the pattern emerging on each string. Okay, so if we look at it, we got 2 notes together here. That's a half step and then a whole step. Okay, and right below it, it's the same thing. Half step, whole step again. So that's easy to memorize. Once you memorize the top string, the next string is the same. And then it changes. It goes whole step, half step. And then this one is whole step, half step. So mentally, it's not the most challenging thing to memorize, these top 4 strings right there. So just start to see these patterns of notes and play them on the guitar. And in the future, I'll probably make a video about memorizing and playing these patterns, but you can find tons of information about these patterns all over the place. You don't need to learn this whole pattern in one day or even 1 week. The important thing is to just start and allow yourself plenty of time to learn it. If you're a guitar player and have no plans of quitting the guitar, then you can take your time learning it, but the important part is to just start and keep going. Okay, now let me talk about why you should learn this pattern. Learning this pattern is the greatest bargain on earth as far as the guitar is concerned. No investment of time you put into the guitar will pay off as greatly as learning this pattern. Okay, so be clear about that. No investment of time you put into the guitar will pay off as greatly as learning this pattern. Let me start off with an obvious one, which is that learning this pattern, you're learning the major scale in all 12 keys. So right there is a huge payoff. You learn 1 pattern, or 5 if you want to think about it that way, but it's multiplied by 12 because of the symmetry of the guitar. What I mean is that you can slide the root notes of the pattern onto any fret and make that your root key. It does not work this way on the piano, for example. On a piano, you play an increasing number of black keys as you move around the circle of fifths, so your finger patterns change. So the key of C has no black keys on the piano. The key of G has 1. The key of D has 2, so you're constantly changing your shapes for each key, so you have to earn the keys on the piano differently. The guitar allows you to slide the pattern to the desired fret, but obviously the catch is that you have to learn multiple mini patterns on the guitar to cover the fretboard. For example, 5 patterns in this caged system. Okay, bullet point 2 here is that this pattern allows you to play in 7 modes. A lot of people who know these patterns do not even understand this important point, and this is really important. They do not understand the additional knowledge locked into what they already know. So first, what is a mode? It's basically a variation on a scale that gives a distinctive sound. Just like the major scale, do, re, mi, etc., has its own flavor, each of these 7 modes available to you have their own flavor as well. What you do is you keep the same pattern you've just learned, but you simply make one of the other notes the new root note. So again, you don't change the pattern of notes, you just allow your brain to recognize a different note as the root note. And when you play the scale, you will see it sounds different. For example, if you were playing the G major scale, try instead of resolving back to the G, try resolving to the A, but play the same pattern of notes. What you're playing now is called the Dorian mode. If you analyze the relationships of the notes, you'll see the scale in relationship to the new tonic, the A, has a minor 3rd and a minor 7th. Okay, this might be over your head right now, but that's what's happening. The degrees are changing in relation to each other when you do this. So many of these modes are popularly used. Okay, Dorian mode, the Mixolydian mode, the Aeolian mode, it's called the natural minor, are frequently used in popular music. So when you start playing these scales, you're playing the major scale to begin with. It's going to sound like do, re, mi. It's like a happy major scale. When you do this, you're going to get different sounds out of the same pattern. That's what I'm trying to show you. So I'll limit my discussion of modes to this brief overview in this video, but basically, after learning this one pattern, you have the ability to play in these 7 modes in all 12 keys. So that's 84 different scales, basically, that you can play after learning this one pattern. Let me also make the point that you don't have to learn the whole fretboard in order to do this. If you learn one of these 5 sub-patterns, you'll be able to position it on any of the 12 keys and start from any note in that octave. So that's 84 possibilities right there. So when you learn that E pattern, if you move it around and start from different notes, there's 84 different scales that you can play off that. Okay, let's talk about bullet point number 3, which is, this is the foundation of all chords. Scale patterns. If you learn this pattern and the degrees of the scale in it, you have the foundations for all of chord theory. So what the degrees are basically the numbers of the notes in an octave. So you start with 1, that's your root, and you count each note. So the next note is 2, the next 3, and so on. So what this does for you is gives you the ingredients to make any chord. Each chord has a formula, and if you understand the formulas, you can use the scale patterns to create chords in any position. You can also break down other chords into their parts or reconfigure them to keep their sounds similar but not lose the overall essence of the original chord. An easy example is a major triad. All major chords are composed of 3 notes: the tonic, or the 1st degree, the 3rd degree, and the 5th degree. So with this knowledge, you can make a major chord basically anywhere and in any inversion on the fretboard using the scale pattern. An inversion is simply reordering the 1st, 3rd, and 5th so that you have 1 on the bottom. So you could have the 5th on the bottom, or the 3rd on the bottom, or the 1st on the bottom, and any combination like that. Okay, bullet point number 4. This scale pattern gives you the ability to be able to play along with any song that you're tuned up with, which, if you are in standard tuning, is probably 95% of all songs. This is an important part of ear training and just practicing and having fun in general. But if you can identify what key a song you are listening to is in, you can set your scale patterns to that key and play along with the song you hear, for example. Once you're able to do this, your ability will improve very quickly. Okay, finally, let's talk about some other benefits. So this first bullet here is, if you become familiar with the degrees and the relative spacing, this will help with learning more exotic scales. So obviously there are scales where the degrees are even more different than any of the modes that you'll be practicing if you learn this one scale pattern. But once you get that foundation under your belt, you understand how to move these degrees around and make approaching these exotic scales even easier for you if that's what you're into, like Japanese scales, Indian scales, Hungarian minor scales. All these different scales have different degrees, and so this allows you to approach them much more easily. Last but not least is this last little bullet here. Practicing the scale patterns greatly improves your dexterity, strength, endurance, and accuracy. Once you start practicing these patterns, you're going to have huge strides just in your physical playing. Your hands are going to get stronger and just all around better. Your ability will grow depending on how complicated you make your practice, such as learning arpeggios, intervals, harmonies. Both left and right hand techniques will improve. So depending on how deep you go with your practice, and believe me, there's plenty of deep levels that you can get into practicing and learning these scale patterns, Your ability is going to get better and better based on that. So I hope this video was helpful for you. I hope it got you amped up a little bit for wanting to learn these scale patterns and get in there and just start learning. And trust me, the knowledge unfolds over time, but you can really start learning and practicing immediately. Just with that one chart I showed at the beginning of the video, if you could just break off little pieces of this and start learning it, you can make some serious headway and you have great benefits for your playing.